economic crisis, we continue to search for solutions in terms of solving a political crisis that the country has faced. I've invited to our studios Member of Parliament of the National People's Party, the Jathika Jana Balawegaya, MP Harini Amarasuriya. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Let's start off talking about the current political crisis and where the JVP-led NPP stands today in terms of seeking solutions to this crisis.
Currently, our position is that this government has lost its mandate. We have a president who was rejected by the people at the last election, who through a quirk in our constitution is now holding a very powerful position without having been elected to that the position he's holding. So we cannot accept that as legitimate, as falling within acceptable democratic practices. Furthermore, the mandate that the people gave in 2019-2020 has changed drastically. The mood of the people has changed, and that's reflected in the protests that people have been involved in over the last couple of years at least. So we feel that the people have a right to express their mandate, that the mood of the people has changed, the will of the people has changed, and that has to be given an opportunity to be tested and to be demonstrated. And within a democratic framework, the only fair way we can do this is through an election.
It was a legitimate president who was asked to go home. The people went out to the streets and asked a president who was given a clear mandate.
Yeah.
And why would you oppose right now that a member of parliament from within your house, from within the parliament, is elected to president following the events that led to this? Because
this is a very unique situation. As you said, a president who was voted into power by an overwhelming majority had to leave also because of people getting on the streets demanding his resignation, right? That suggests that there's something very profoundly different about the will of the people from what they felt in 2019 and what they're feeling right now. And in the circumstances, in those kinds of circumstances, we think it is not appropriate for someone to step into that position and claim that mandate for a further 2.5 years without it being tested. Holding that position as an interim power, as a transitionary measure is fine, but to just continue with that office when that person has not been elected, and when it's very clear in our constitution, despite all its weaknesses, the constitution is very clear. Sovereignty lies with the people, and the people have to elect their representatives, and it's very clear even about the executive position, that the people have the power, have sovereignty over the executive presidency as well, right? And therefore they elect someone through their choice. Ranil Wickremesinghe was not elected.
So are you saying that Ranil Wickremesinghe's appointment as the head of state executive president is not legitimate, regardless of the fact that a majority of the people's representatives in parliament voted him in?
For two reasons. One is that the people who voted him into parliament are also representing a political movement that is being questioned and rejected by people, right? So yes, if you look at it in terms of the lines of a constitution, there's nothing illegitimate about this, but it is morally incorrect. In terms of democratic principles, it's incorrect. So for a government to govern, for a government to have legitimacy in the eyes of the people, it's not enough to be able to legally defend itself. It must appear to be legitimate. It must win the trust of people. This government has failed to do that. The president has failed to do that. And that's what's at the bottom causing the political instability. And unless that is addressed, the political instability will continue, and that's going to have a serious impact on the economic situation.
But right now we do not see people going out to the streets demanding the president's resignations, as we saw previously when President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, then president, was in power. So do you still think that the tone has not changed?
The tone has certainly not changed. The nature of the protests have changed, also because of the vicious backlash from the government on protesters. You see what's happening on almost on a daily basis when even a small group of people are out protesting. There's such a heavy-handed response from the people, from the government, that it's making it very difficult for people to express themselves. So we are talking about a shrinking democratic space for people to express their views as well, right? But given that none of the issues that the people raised during the protests have been resolved, there's nothing to say that the mood of the people has changed. And certainly when we talk to people, when we meet people on a daily basis, we are also representatives of the people. And what they tell us is that they are not happy with the situation. They too want an opportunity to exercise their mandate.
Are you also saying that law enforcement authorities taking action against any breach of law and order should not be allowed, especially in the context that a peaceful protest was later transformed into violence because of certain political party intervention after the May 9th incidents and thereon? Do you accept the kind of violence that was seen around Colombo?
I think if we talk about what happened on May 9th, let's start with what happened on the morning of May 9th, right? When goons set out from Temple Trees and attacked what was a peaceful protest, right? So let's start from there, and let's start with whether those who carried out that attack have been brought to account, whereas the police and the government have been very keen on going after those who responded to that brutal attack on unarmed protesters on a very peaceful protest, right? So we can't talk about what happened in the afternoon and evening of May 9th without taking into consideration what happened on the morning, which provoked those attacks, right? So let's treat all those acts of violence in the same way. We don't condone acts of violence, not at all. Those who broke the law must be brought before the law and held to account. But everybody has to be treated equally then, right? All those who broke the law must be treated in the same way. And I'm not just talking about what happened on the 9th of May. What about things that happened after the 9th of May? What about when the protesters were removed from Galle Face in the middle of the night, after they had made a declaration, after they had made a public statement that they were going to leave the space the next day in a few hours, the police attacked them in the middle of the night and drove them away. Subsequently, people have been arrested. 3 people were arrested under the Prevention of Terrorism Act and detained for 90 days without a charge. 1 has already been bailed. 2 are still being held under the PTA. What about the attack that happened just a couple of days ago when people were at Galle Face commemorating those who had died, holding candles? There was nothing violent about that protest. What provoked the attack there from the police when children were snatched or parents were arrested in front of their children? It was completely unprovoked. It was completely over the top. This was not about law and order. What was the law that those people had broken at that point? What about all the protests earlier where the police have attacked those protesting with water cannons and with tear gas? Which law exactly did they break at that point, right? So it's not just about arresting people who are involved in the violence in the aftermath of the attack on the protest on the 9th of May. It is subsequent to that, especially after Ranil Wickremesinghe became president and the government cracked down on any kind of dissent, any kind of protest, which is causing real worry and real fear about the way in which people's constitutional rights are being violated. You know that the law that is above every other law is the Constitution. The Constitution protects people's right of expression, right to dissent, right to form association, right to assembly, and the police are invoking laws under certain powers that they have and using those to disrupt and to to violate constitutional rights.
And how do you respond to claims that a peaceful campaign of protests was later turned into a politically motivated campaign as a result of JVP-led the NPP and other parties being part of this this protest campaign?
I think that's a ridiculous claim to make, because the protests were always political in that the demands were political, right? If by politics you're talking about challenging, politics is not just about being affiliated to a party. Politics is also about struggling, citizens' movements, citizen struggles, about power, about governance issues, which was largely what the protest was about.
Are you saying that the JVP and the NPP were involved in these protests from the beginning as a party?
Of course we were, as lots of other groups were, right? Right from the beginning, our student groups, our women's groups, our artist groups, they were involved in the protests, not just the JVP, the NPP. There were lots of other political parties part of the movement, including people who claimed to be supporting Ranil Wickremesinghe at that time. So it was a very diverse group of people who were protesting. There were, before the protest centered around Galface, there was a long series of protests by teachers. They belonged to every party. There were lots who were not part of any political party. Prior to that, the farmers protested. That was not a JVP-led protest. That the farmers were also people who belonged to many parties or who belonged to no party. What was unique about the Galface sort of Aragalaya was their very conscious desire to remain non-partisan. To be non-partisan is very different to being non-political. You can't say the protests were non-political. They were highly political. But they were non-partisan because it was not dominated by any one party. And this narrative that the JVP or the NPP dominated that Aragalaya, that protest, is completely wrong and extremely undermining of the huge coordinated effort and the sort of huge participation of lots of different groups in that protest. I think it's doing that ethos of non-partisanship, that ethos of accepting a lot of diversity in that group, a complete disservice to think that the JVP or any other one political group had control over that.
What is the solution that your coalition proposes that Sri Lanka implement right now, apart from going in for elections?
Well, there is, the reason why we are asking for elections is as a first step towards resolving the crisis, because there is a crisis of trust in the government, right? And without that trust, there can't be political stability. Without political stability, we can't begin to resolve the economic crisis that we are facing. So that is why we are calling for an election, to give the people an opportunity to establish a government that they can work with, that they can trust for at least 1.5 years, 2 years. You know, every new government is given an opportunity. People then take a step back and allow the government to go ahead and do things. But this government is seen as a continuation of the government that the people have been rejecting and the people have been protesting against. That is why it's going to be very difficult for this government to win the trust of the people, especially when they continue to behave in a way that disregards the mood and the sentiments of the general public.
If MP Anurukumara Dissanayake, the JVP leader, was appointed as president at the time during the discussions in search of a head of state, do you think you would have still supported for a new election going forward?
Yes, because when we put forward a proposal for an interim government and said that we are willing for Anurukumara Dissanayake to take on the position as Prime Minister at that point, this was after the resignation of Mahinda Rajapaksa. One of the conditions that there were two conditions that we put. One was the resignation of the president, and the second was an all-party interim government with a specific time frame, with a specific agenda. We had proposed something like 3 to 6 months and then an election. So even in the proposal we put forward after May 9th, it was for an interim all-party government as a transition before an election. Then after Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled the country and there was a couple of days of uncertainty, then again we tried to put that proposal forward of an interim government for a specific duration with a specific agenda consisting of all the representative political parties in parliament currently.
But the current situation of the country does not allow for an election.
Why not?
A massive burden on the people. Do you think the country and the economy could bear the burden of such an expense in holding elections at this juncture?
This country has held elections in far worse situations. And there are ways in which an election can be conducted economically, right? And
but we don't have a culture or tradition where we have managed in such. We don't have the technology to do such.
No, I think it's not a question of technology. There can be ways in which an election can be. You can figure out a way of spending less on an election. You can have an election campaign that calls for curtailing in spending. All kinds of things can be done. In fact, there are unions, government sector unions that have come forward who have said they will waive their allowances and whatever other payments they get during election times in order to bring down the cost of an election. That's in practical terms. But also at a more sort of political level, the cost of maintaining a government like this is bigger. The cost of having a government that is not working, a government that is not trusted by the people, a government that is unable to fix the problems or respond to the people's problems, is having far greater cost on the economy than the cost of an election.
Do you think that your coalition would support any good measures taken by this government? Because an allegation is that the JVP-led NPP would never see the good side of things or good side of good deeds, good actions taken by any government.
That's not true. I mean, what good proposals have the government put forward that we have not supported, right? I mean, the 22nd Amendment was something that we would have supported. We were considering amendments to that, to bring in amendments to that amendment, which would have further strengthened the 22nd Amendment, further strengthened it towards democratizing the country, the political space, but that was not taken up for consideration. So what other pro-people proposals has this government come up with that we can possibly support?
What other solutions do you have going forward, apart from going in for an election? If this government does not go in for elections, we have to manage the situation in the interim and other solutions are required. So from within Parliament, what does your coalition propose?
Within Parliament, it's very difficult with this composition of the Parliament, right? As I said, what we need right now is a Parliament that is able to respond, to act on behalf of the people, right? To recognize the suffering that people are under, to recognize the problems that people are facing, and to come up with solutions. Instead, this Parliament is functioning, which still has a majority by the SLPP, is still functioning in terms of how to protect its own power, right? So what you see is a continuation of the kind of corrupt, deal-making politics that has plagued this country for so long. Without changing that, there is no way that we can move forward. So this Parliament has lost its legitimacy, and this Parliament is precisely what is preventing the kinds of reforms and changes that are necessary to take the country forward. So we are not just asking for an election for the sake of asking for an election. We are asking for an election in order to be able to start resolving the very serious problems that this country is facing. And that's not just to say that we are intent on forming a government. The people have to be allowed to choose, right? If we are chosen, then we have a set of proposals about how to take the country forward. But to do that, you need a Parliament that is progressive. You need a Parliament that can be led by people who are anti-corruption and who are serious about accountability and transparency and all those other fundamental features of of governance that are necessary for a country to come out of this huge crisis that we are facing.
Why do you think there's no honesty and sincerity in the formation of a national council in Parliament?
Because look at the people on it. Look at the people who've been nominated on it. Most of them have charges of corruption against them. Most of them have charges not just of corruption, but other violent crimes as well, right? If they were sincere in their efforts, and those were the very people that the people's protests were critiquing, were asking for a change, right? So if the People's Council, this council that was set up, was ostensibly set up as a response to the pressures from outside, then it has to heed the mood, the sentiments expressed in that movement. And the sentiments that were most profoundly expressed there was about anti-corruption, accountability, a move away from this very sort of patronage-based political culture that we currently have. But yet, the people the government nominated to that to the council personify some of those very problems that that the protests and the people's movements were critiquing and were agitating against. So that's completely ignoring what that protest was all about.
We're in conversation with MP Harini Amarasuriya. We'll be back at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24 right after this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're joining us at Hyde Park. We've been talking about the political situation in the country, but turning to solve the economic crisis, why is it that you do not agree with the proposals of the interim budget and the vision set through a medium to long-term achievement for Sri Lanka through 2022 interim budget and then going forward the 2023 budget which is to be proposed?
So the interim budget did not come up with any proposal, any fresh proposal to look at addressing the fundamental causes of the crisis that we are facing. What are the fundamental causes of the current economic crisis? Is debt unsustainability, the budget deficit, and high levels of caused as a result of high levels of corruption, wastage, all of these factors, right? So there's also a budget deficit to be met, which includes then looking at pruning government expenditure, while also looking into ways in which we can increase our incomes, right, and increase our ability to generate dollars. Where in the interim budget were there proposals that looked at some of those specific measures, right? Apart from raising taxes, what other measures were there to address some of those fundamental issues that have caused the crisis? The other aspect of it is that you have to take into consideration that right now there's a large segment of this population that is having to deal with this crisis, which is not of their own making. People have paid taxes, people have worked very hard, and they are now bearing the brunt of a crisis that has not been created by them, but has been created by successive governments and their failures, right? But now people have to pay the price. Where are the protections for the people who have to deal with this crisis? Where are the social protection mechanisms that should be in place to address issues of hunger, to address severe problems in the education system, right, which have been disrupted over the 2.5 years, first as a result of COVID, then as a result of the economic crisis, right? What about the burden of care that women have had to take on because of the economic crisis? So where are the measures, right? So this budget, the interim budget, was just a continuation of the policies that have brought us to this crisis. That was why we could not support it. If in the budget they had proposed something that looked at really addressing the causal factors, we would certainly have supported it.
So what fundamental changes would you have proposed or would you have brought about if the budget was presented by the NPP coalition, especially to address those fundamental causes of this crisis, as you said.
Yeah. Start with cutting down, attacking the wastage and corruption in government, right? Limit the cabinet, limit the privileges of cabinet members and parliamentarians, because if we are to go into a period of austerity, then you have to start right at the top. The top has to set that example of taking measures of austerity. None of that was done, right? The amount would not be significant, but the example set would send a signal to the people of this country that the leadership is willing to make sacrifices, that the sacrifices being demanded of the people are being first made by the leaders. And that's important when you're trying to address a crisis of this nature. We would look at the tax system in a way that would, we have huge problems in our tax system, right? And in tax collection, not just in increasing taxes, primary problem lies with collection and administration of taxes. So looking at ways in which taxes can be collected more efficiently and used more efficiently so that people are incentivized to pay taxes rather than escape taxes because they know that their taxes are not going to be wasted. To look at holding those who've robbed public funds for so long accountable and trying to recover some of those funds, right, without placing the entire burden on the public who are not responsible for this crisis, but actually holding the people who caused this mess accountable and trying to recover some of the stolen money from the public accounts that has been going on for so long. Bringing in measures to reduce corruption, to hold government and others accountable. Those are some of the measures that could have been brought in, which also would have gone a long way in addressing the trust deficit that has developed in this country between the government and the people, because that would have signaled a sincerity of effort and also a signal that the people's voices have been heard and are being responded to.
You said tax collection should be improved and not just increasing taxes. Does that mean you do not agree with the recent amendments brought through the budget for increased taxation?
Do you mean the gazette that was put out recently? Well, no, we don't agree with that, because those tax measures have really will really hit the middle class, who's already reeling from high levels of inflation, right? There is a severe problem in our tax system, no doubt, and it requires fundamental reforms. But as I said, we need simpler laws, simpler methods for tax collection, better administration, but better collection, use of better technology in collecting taxes to make it easier for people to pay taxes. I was on COPA I have been also reappointed to COPA. And one of the departments we audit is the Inland Revenue Department. There are lots of pending cases of large corporates that have not paid taxes. That's because of the loopholes in the tax system. So those need to be also fixed, right? You can look at some of the loopholes in the current tax system about why we are not able to collect taxes efficiently, instead of simply placing the burden of taxes on the middle class, on people on a monthly salary who will be directly taxed, right, from their salary itself. Are
you saying Sri Lanka should leave out these segments of the society and target the bigger corporates for taxation?
Not at all. It's not about
how do you think this tax system, a structure that works well for the country, should be implemented?
A structure that is fair, that taxes different segments based on their income, based on their wealth, and where there is a system of collecting taxes more efficiently, right? But taking into account the current economic crisis, right? And the fact that already things like electricity tariffs have increased, transport have increased, food costs have gone up. Food inflation, as you know, is over 94% right now. So looking at the different segments of the community that have been impacted by this crisis and making sure that they are not overburdened by the tax regime that is being implemented. The current proposal is simply placing that burden on the segments of the population that are already heavily burdened and are really reeling from this crisis. Looking at how we can protect some of the smaller and medium enterprises who are really facing a crunch with the economic crisis, with the import restrictions and other issues that in the economic conditions currently. Those enterprises, those small and medium entrepreneurs really need some protection and incentives right now, and just taxing them right at this moment is going to further shrink the economy, because people are not earning in order to be able to pay taxes, right? So we need to, one of the basic problems with our tax system is this very ad hoc tax reforms that are brought in periodically, right? 2 years ago we had one VAT system, today we have another VAT system. We are going to propose something else. We can't do this in this way, in this sort of ad hoc manner.
But the president has assured that policy consistency is something that he looks to instill going forward through the budget and whatever policy measures that are being formulating. Do you think that is a possibility?
Why should we trust the word of a man who has been in power 6 times before, who has been in politics at least from the day I can remember, practically all my life, right? Who has been in power, who has held positions of power and responsibility, who had all the time in the world when he was in power all these many years ago to set those policy consistencies and to set those standards and to set what? He just woke up to the fact that this country has inconsistent policies? He has been in power. He has been Prime Minister 5 times before.
Do you think he had the absolute power to implement these changes? He was Prime Minister and there was an executive he worked with. Do you think he had the authority to work in line with implementing those policies that he says he had a chance to?
He was Prime Minister in a government formed by his government, with a cabinet that he had control over. He was Prime Minister in a government with the 19th Amendment, which gave considerable power to the Prime Minister. He was a minister in a government that had a overwhelming majority in Parliament for several years, for 17 years to be exact. He is now the President with no support in Parliament, with a government which basically got to power, whose entire campaign was focused on getting this current president out of power. Their entire campaign was based on that, right? So now he's the president of this government with 1 single seat in Parliament. Surely, when he was Prime Minister before, he had far more leverage than he has now, and he was unable to bring in any of the reforms that he's now talking about.
Are you saying no progress has been made so far in terms of Sri Lanka managing this crisis, or looking for solutions going forward, from discussions with the creditor nations to striking a balance in terms of managing Sri Lanka's balance of payments crisis and going forward to find solutions to the foreign exchange crisis? Are you saying no progress has been made?
Yeah, I'm saying no progress has been made. What is the progress that has been made? Internationally, we have become a pariah state now, right? Not only in terms of the fact that we are defaulting and we are bankrupt, we are considered bankrupt, but that we are also being named as a corrupt nation, a nation with corrupt leaders, a nation with leaders who have committed economic crimes on top of human rights violations, right? I mean, the entire world has condemned us. So where is the progress on the international front? We were told that the IMF agreement is around the corner, but we have made no progress with regard to the bilateral, the discussions on debt restructuring, right? Or Parliament has still not been given any information regarding the agreement with IMF, right? So what is the progress exactly that we have made?
Securing a bailout package, do you think, from the IMF will not serve its purpose?
But we have not secured a bailout
But
package.
there is progress being
made. What
made,
is the progress
and
that is being
discussions
made?
are continuing with Japan, asking these countries, and Japan expressing their willingness to work with creditor nations as a coordinator, as a co-chairman of a creditor conference that Sri Lanka could have in terms of restructuring Sri Lanka's debt. But this is a process. So along with everything that is happening in terms of political whatever progress that we're making, are you saying that in terms of managing the economic front, we have not made that kind of progress? If not, what alternative do you think in this current juncture we need to look for?
The IMF deal to bailout package to materialize, and even if the IMF package in and of itself will resolve our crisis, let's leave that aside. For the IMF package to materialize, two conditions will have to be met. We have to have a debt sustainability plan, which the government has to present, which it has not presented. It has to have agreement from all its creditors for debt restructuring. That includes the bilateral, the agreements that we have bilaterally for loans, as well as the ISBs, right? We are still talking about all of those. We don't have any agreement from any of those creditors as yet. If you recall, soon after the Prime Minister made his statement in Parliament last week about Japan taking the leadership, Japanese government put out a statement sort of in contradiction of what the Prime Minister had just said, the President had just said in Parliament, right? So I don't think the picture is as rosy as you made it out to be. But leaving all that aside, think of the people and what the people are facing right now. With the high levels of inflation, with the problems that they're facing on a daily basis, which of those problems have been resolved? Right? This is a crisis that has been in the making for over a year. This is a crisis that is not a result of natural disaster, but it's a human disaster of wrong decisions, of patently wrong decisions that have had huge consequences for people. Where is the accountability for any of that? So how has progress been made?
We are also speaking at a time when the IMF, World Bank and other economists are warning of a recession risk globally around the corner. The UK is already, its growth forecasts are plunging. The US is in trouble, and several other European countries, given the prolonged COVID risks and the ongoing effects of the war in Ukraine. But this also means that developing countries and countries as Sri Lanka will not be spared. So given the crisis now, Sri Lanka will have other added implications as a result of the global economic meltdown. How do you think these reforms and these policies that you speak of should be brought through Parliament, through a consensus of all parliamentarians, without going in for elections, if you're not going for elections, that is? And what specific reforms and measures do you think we need to bring, looking at overcoming and managing those risks?
There is no way forward without an election, because the fundamental problem lies in our political culture and our political system. And unless that is fixed, unless there is an opportunity for the people to elect a government that can win their trust, that can bring about a fundamental change in the political culture, hard as it is, we are not going to be able to move forward. So that's essential. There's no way that we can move around that. Creating a consensus government in this Parliament, that moment has passed, right? We could have done that when the Prime Minister resigned and when the President fled the country. There were two moments. If the government had been open to a more serious discussion about it.
But you were not in agreement, the JVP-led
No, we proposed an interim government. We had discussions with all the parties for an interim government, but it was not an interim. But our proposal was not for an interim government to continue the policies of this government. It was for an interim government that was truly built on consensus from all the different parties. They were not willing to do that. So we were not willing to be part of a consensus government or a national government for the sake of letting this government continue with its policies. Why should we do that when we fundamentally disagree with their policies? But if they were willing to come up, to sit with all of us and come up with a consensus plan, then you can form a consensus government. But they basically developed a plan and asked us to be part of that. That's not consensus. That's just asking us to provide legitimacy for something that they have already come up with, which we are not willing to do.
In the case of a future election, do you think, given the current context, the people's aspirations and their concerns, that a coalition, the JVP-led coalition, and the parties will be able to secure a bigger share of power in Parliament?
Certainly, that's the basis on which we are working right now. We are confident that we can, that we have an opportunity to make a significant difference in a future election. That's what we are working towards. That's our hope. But the ultimate decision lies with the people of this country, and that's why we feel that the people of this country have to be given the opportunity to make that choice, whether it's us or anyone else.
What policy changes will you promise to the people during such election?
Well, fundamentally a change of a policy, of the political culture, of the corrupt political culture, of the wasteful political culture. So we would be very focused on reducing corruption, on eliminating corruption, on holding those those engaged in corruption, for holding those accountable, for pruning the government. For instance, we propose an amendment to the Constitution, which we wanted to bring into the 22nd Amendment, actually, limiting the number of ministries to 25, putting that in the Constitution so that no one can sort of change it willy-nilly. 25 ministries and 25 deputy ministers, nothing more than that, pruning some of the privileges. So bringing down the expenditure of government would be a start. Then we have been working for over 2 years in developing policies in 10 to 12 different sectors, including education, health, agriculture, tourism. We had a meeting on our tourism policy recently with stakeholders from the tourism sector, and it was well received. Similarly, we have developed economic policy in the short term for economic revival. So there are lots of things that we've been discussing with people in those different sectors in taking the country forward. So we have a short term strategy, but some of the issues that we need to address can't be addressed in the short term. For instance, moving towards a more production-based economy where we can encourage sectors like the IT or tourism to really revive those sectors so that we can capture a substantial section of the global market in terms of the strengths that we have. Right? We've changed fundamental changes. We proposed fundamental changes to the education system, which will be moved away from this sort of exam-oriented, competitive, highly sort of individualized kind of education culture to a much more liberating, much more child-friendly and less exam-oriented culture, which will produce the kinds of citizens that this country needs, who can take forward the country to the next level. We've proposed a modernizing of the agriculture sector, of eliminating the corruption at the level of the middleman, so that both the consumer and the farmer can be protected. So there are many proposals that we have in mind, but none of these proposals can be implemented without that fundamental change in the political culture that I talked about, where we first focus on eliminating corruption, eliminating wastage, and eliminating nepotism, which means that the people who are who really should be in positions of authority and power are not in those positions, able to do what they should be doing.
Finally, how will you individually work with other political party representatives as a collective to address the question of women representation in Parliament and other high places?
We already have a women's caucus in Parliament where there are only 12 of us in Parliament currently, but we form a caucus, and we've put forward many proposals to the Speaker as well as to the electoral reform process on ensuring a quota for women at all different decision-making levels, including at sort of governance, in governance bodies, but also proposing certain changes within political parties to make it more enabling for women to enter politics, and change once again in the political culture to make it less violent, less corrupt, less sort of dependent on family patronage and money to be able to get into politics, because that is one of the biggest problems that prevent women, biggest barriers for women to enter politics. So making those kinds of changes within political parties as well, and really working with women activists to encourage them to get into the system and to take leadership in whatever way possible.
Thank you very much for your time here at Hyde Park.
Thank you.
We had with us parliamentarian Harini Amarasuriya of the National People's Power joining us tonight at Hyde Park on AdaDerana 24. We'll see you again next week at the same time with yet another discussion. Do stay with us. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.